This story happened to me around 20 years ago, when I was still a sophomore in high school. My aunt and uncle had a 3-story condo that was always kind of off. It wasn't a particularly old or creepy-looking building, in my recollection, but as soon as you set foot inside, there was something in the air that reeked of something isn't right. For a little background, the condo's first floor held the living and dining areas, the kitchen, and the back door that led to a small patio. The second story was the master bedroom, 2 guest rooms, a bathroom, and a little nook for the washer and dryer. The third floor was a game room with several old video game consoles like Atari Jaguar and Sega Genesis, with my uncle's Star Trek collection in one corner and a door that led you to the attic crawl space. It also had a pull-out sofa sleeper for guests. This layout information is relevant for later. As I grew up, we visited the condo many times. The entire building had an odd aura to it, but this all culminated on the 3rd floor. When you walked over the final stair up to the 3rd floor, the air just changed, where on the 2nd floor you could hear the sounds of family visiting downstairs and outside traffic. On the 3rd, it was dead silent. The air was heavy and thick. No sounds permeated here, and you were always left with a feeling of being stared at or watched, almost as if you were intruding there. Being kids, my cousins and I would often go up to the 3rd floor to play video games. However, we never went up there alone, and absolutely never went up at night. It was just one of those places that felt like it was on a different plane of existence, its own pocket dimension of silence and gloom. My family had seen and heard things in that condo on multiple occasions. It was common knowledge that one could hear footsteps pacing up and down the stairs at night. You would see figures out of the corner of your eye, doors would open and close despite being locked, objects would move, that sort of thing. One morning I woke up before the adults to find a trail of pennies lying from end to end from the 3rd floor all the way down to the kitchen. I remember being a little unsettled by this, but not particularly afraid. I was more interested in free money and greedily put the pennies in a Ziploc bag to take them home with me. Because these goings-on were relatively benign in nature, my family assumed it to be the spirit of my late grandfather, who was the mischievous sort in life, watching over the house at night. Fast forward to my teenage years. My uncle died suddenly, and so a flood of tight-knit family descended on the condo to comfort my aunt and attend my uncle's funeral. Because there were so many people staying in the condo, my mum, dad, sister and I were relegated to sleeping upstairs on the 3rd floor. I was creeped out, but figured, hey, how bad could it be? Boy, was I in for a surprise. The day of the funeral came and we all attended the wake, after which the family gathered outside to comfort my aunt, who was sobbing uncontrollably at the loss of her husband. I remember the sound being a gut-wrenching, heartbreaking cry of pure despair. It hurt to listen to, so I quickly retreated from the crowd of onlookers and went to find my cousins, who were ready to leave. Little did I know all hell was about to break loose. We got back to the condo and everyone wept and shared stories of my uncle. After some time, we all grew tired and decided it was time for bed. I slept on the sofa while my mum and dad and little sister all shared an air mattress down on the floor by the foot of the sofa. What I remember most about that night was the cold. I startled awake in the middle of the night, unsure of what had woken me, only to be greeted by the most bone-biting, skin-saturating cold I've ever felt in my life. It permeated the entire 3rd floor, soaking through my clothes and into my body. I shuddered and pulled the blanket tighter around me. I remember being puzzled by the cold, as the 3rd floor usually got uncomfortably warm. I lay there shivering for a few minutes, and then I heard it. The sound I heard is hard to describe, but it's probably best described as something trying its best to mimic my aunt's sobbing from earlier. It was a dry, raspy voice, crying and choking and carrying on in a mocking tone. and it was very loud. I mean ear-splittingly loud. It was coming from the far corner of the room, over by the crawl space door. I froze in terror. What on earth was going on? Was this some kind of an entity? I peeked over the edge of my blanket and gazed into the darkness at the corner of the room. But of course, nothing was there. My mother, having had past experiences with paranormal things, had once told me that if anything scary ever happened like that, to ignore it, and it would go away. So that's exactly what I tried to do. I squinted my eyes shut and pretended to be asleep. When that didn't work, I tried covering my head with the couch cushion to blot out the sound. That didn't work either. The sound stayed as loud as it had been, almost as if it were coming from inside my own head. I lay like that for what seemed like minutes, but was probably only 45 seconds or so, when another noise grabbed my attention, the rustling of blankets. I peered out from under my own blankets to see my mother had bolted up on the mattress. She looked left and right with confusion, then jumped up and ran down the stairs to the second floor. My father and sister were still sound asleep. This next part is what my mum told me after she ran down the stairs. When my mum hit the second floor, she immediately opened the master bedroom, thinking my aunt was awake and crying. But nope, sound asleep. My mum could still hear the wailing, so she checked all the other rooms on the second floor and everyone was asleep. Confused, she stood at the bottom of the stairs, leading up to the third floor, and listened to the wailing. Meanwhile, my fear had given way to my curiosity, glancing cautiously over towards the corner where the sound was coming from. I leaned over the banister and gazed down to the second floor, and I could see the hall light downstairs, and Mum looked bewildered at the bottom of the steps. "Mum?" She nearly jumped out her skin. Her head snapped up to look at me. "Are you looking for the wailing sound?" My mum's eyes widened. "You heard it too?" I nodded. "But why isn't anyone else waking up?" she called up. I shrugged. She then turned away from me and headed down towards the stairs leading to the first floor. As she rounded the corner towards the first floor, she ran headlong into my little cousin. He was wide-eyed, in tears and shaking. My mum asked him what was wrong, and he said that it was coming to get him. My mum began to ask what was coming to get him when she saw it. A shadow, humanoid, came lurching up the steps towards them, blacker than the darkness surrounding it. As it approached, it began to morph, to grow, and it was now standing at 8 feet tall, lunging up the remaining stairs, making a horrible sound as it came. My mum grabbed my cousin and began sprinting up the stairs, the shadow stomping just behind her. This cacophony caught my attention, and now, completely ignoring the wailing in the room with me, I craned my neck over the banister to see what was going on. I saw Mum sliding around the corner towards the third floor stairs, a flood of shade and darkness filling the hallway behind her. My little cousin was screaming and clutching at her neck as she ran, taking the stairs 2 at a time. "Mum, Mum," I cried, "it's right behind you." She obliged and came flying up the final few steps towards the third floor. As soon as she cleared the landing, the wailing completely stopped, cut off like someone pulling the plug on a speaker. She leapt into the air mattress with my cousin, and I abandoned all pretense of maturity and clambered onto the mattress with them. We all sat there huddled in abject terror, staring into the darkness of the staircase, but nothing came. No shadow, no wailing, nothing. That's when the stomping started. Up and down the stairs it went, over and over, rattling the knickknacks on the walls, vibrating to the floors. Still no one woke up, and after several minutes of this, the footsteps reached the third floor and stopped dead. The temperature in the room immediately started to plummet. My mum had clearly had enough. She started violently waking up my father. "Wake up!" she snarled at him. When my dad woke up, everything got quiet again. He was groggy and annoyed and asked us what we were doing. We explained what had happened, and my cousin, still crying in my mother's arms, as he looked at us skeptically, but listened intently with us for any sounds in the house. Sounds never came for the rest of the night, but none of us really slept after that. In the morning, my cousin, still visibly shaken, explained to us what had happened before Mum found him. He said he heard a voice calling him from downstairs and thought his father, my late uncle, had returned somehow. He was young and I don't think he understood the permanence of death, and when he went down to investigate, he said he ran into the shadow and that it was too big to be my daddy. I don't know what exactly happened that night. I've read about shadow people, about jinn, about demons, but nothing quite matches the being we saw that night. If anyone has a good answer or has run into an entity like this, I would love to hear about it. This happened right after my wife and I got married and moved to Idaho. We had just settled into our new apartment and were getting used to our routine. One night we were lying in bed. My wife had fallen asleep beside me, but I was still awake. I often stayed up late reading comic books, sometimes for hours on end, and this night was no different. I believe I was reading a Spider-Man series. Our bed was positioned along the wall where the door was, so I had a clear view of it from where I was laying. As I read, I felt a strange sensation, like I was being watched. At first I shrugged it off, thinking it was just my imagination, but then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. There above the doorframe was what seemed to be a black shadow peeking at me. It looked as if it was standing upside down on the living room ceiling, staring directly into our bedroom. It reminded me of a bat hanging upside down, its head poking in the room. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, convinced that I was just seeing things. But when I looked again, it was still there, its dark form unmistakable. Being nearsighted, I couldn't make out any details, but I could tell it was looking at me. It felt almost like it was playing a game of peekaboo, ducking out of sight when I focused on it, only to reappear moments later. The room felt colder, and a chill ran down my spine. My breathing grew shallow, and my heart pounded in my chest. I got that feeling that feels like someone dropped a hot rock in my stomach, and I stared at it in shock, unable to move or look away. My mind raced, trying to make sense of whatever I was seeing. Was it a trick of the light? A figment of my imagination? However, after a few moments of making sure I was lucid, I knew it was real. The way it moved, the way it seemed aware of my presence, convinced me that it was no illusion. Desperately, I reached over and shook my wife, trying to wake her up. "Annie, wake up!" She began to stir, and the shadow slowly moved its head up and disappeared into the darkness of the living room. My wife groggily asked what was wrong, but I could tell she sensed the fear in my voice. I explained what I had seen, my voice trembling. She was too terrified to even look herself, but it wouldn't have mattered anyway, as whatever entity it was had already vanished. It felt like it was playing with me. We lay there, in the silent darkness. Neither of us felt safe. I said a prayer for peace, asking for protection and strength, and slowly my nerves began to calm down, and eventually we managed to fall asleep, though it was a restless night. The next day I didn't waste any time. I called someone to have our home blessed, hoping to rid our house of whatever presence had visited us. Thankfully, we never had any more problems after that, but even now, I can't help but wonder about that night. What was it that I saw? The most terrifying thing is that I know it was real, and I know it knew just how afraid I was. I lived in North Carolina for 35 years since I was 5. I met my husband here, and we've raised our family here for 22 years. When we first moved into our own home, we'd been married for 1 year, and I was pregnant with our first child. My husband left for work around 5:30 a.m. He's a lineman, so works early, and I laid in bed until around 8:30, trying to usually avoid falling into morning sickness. And while I laid in an empty house, on the verge of the very first morning, I could hear sounds in my kitchen. Cabinet doors opening and closing, boxes so carefully folded closed in that well-known puzzle corner over corner over corner were opening, and boxes shifting as though they were being emptied and things put in their place. I got out of bed expecting my husband, and there was no one to be found. No boxes amiss, no contents removed. Everything as it had been left the night before. I kind of decided I was maybe tired or crazy, even though I knew I was awake because I was nauseated and waiting for it to pass. Fast forward around 4 years, and we have 2 children. The girl we were expecting when we moved in, and a boy who surprised us only 14 months after the first. Everyone's asleep. It's around 4 a.m., and I am awoken to the sound of my almost 3-year-old and my 4-year-old quietly singing in the living room. I'm laying in my room listening and thinking, it's too early to start the day. I'm so tired. But when you have little ones, the day starts when they start. So I lay a few more minutes bargaining so that maybe they'll go back to sleep and accept my fate and use the restroom. And I put on my housecoat, and mind you, they haven't stopped singing since I woke up. I walk through my room, and as I pass through the kitchen, the singing stops immediately. As I'm walking into my empty living room, I see no one. That was odd. So I check on the kids in their room, and they're out cold, fast asleep. I look around and everything is in its place. The TV isn't on, no radio playing, just silence. I go back to bed. No reason to lose precious sleep when it's so hard to come by with the little ones. And as you can imagine, these events left me profoundly afraid. When I was 7, my family, consisting of my 2 older brothers of 13 and 15 and my mother, moved house. We moved to a street that was built on an old tram track from around the 1900s. The line of terraced properties themselves were fairly new. When we moved in, they were only around 15 years old. All of the properties have a rear garden that is divided by a meter-tall wooden fence. Each garden has a shared rear wall that is 7 feet tall and made of concrete. This wall separates the properties from the grounds of the local park, and this is all relevant information, I promise. As a kid, I kept myself entertained. The age gap between my brothers and myself was enough for me to be left out of things, and my parents were recently divorced. I would make up games and act out imaginary scenes. It was not uncommon to find me playing by myself in the back garden. We had pet rabbits that lived in a hutch that were up against the back wall mentioned earlier. Being the curious child that I was, I used to like standing on the hutch and looking over the wall into the park and people watch. I remember it being a warm night. The sun was setting a bit later in the day, but with the way the daylight plays out in my memory, it must be around 7 p.m. I was out in the garden, people watching from my rabbit hutch vantage point, when I had the sudden urge to look over my right shoulder. With the way my house is laid out, the kitchen is at the rear of the house, and if I were to enter the house, I'd open the door and walk through the kitchen, my neighbor's house, which would be on my right as I looked back. So I looked over my right shoulder, and my neighbor's back door is open. There are no lights on. It's dark in the sitting room, and I can't make anything out, but I know they have a sofa facing out, and it would be where I was looking. That's when I see 2 red dots, spaced apart and not changing distance from one another, floating in the middle of this black room. I remember squinting, trying to figure out what I'm seeing, and I kid you not, these 2 dots move in a smooth arc to the right and upwards, as if there were eyes on some kind of face standing from the sofa. As they move, they seem to get a bit closer to the door, and I can make out nothing except for a dark silhouette. I freak out and run back inside, all the way to the front of the house where our sitting room is located to tell my mum, and she assures me it's nothing, and I head back outside. I climb back onto the rabbit's hutch and immediately look behind me again. The figure with its red eyes is now standing in the doorway of their house, looking out into the garden. I nope once more back to the house, and this time I do not go back outside. For years I forgot about this experience, but I've always been afraid of the dark, and I especially hate looking out at the windows at night, particularly in the back garden. Something jogged my memory of it a few years ago, and every time I talk about it, it makes me want to cry, because it scared me so much. I still remember every damn detail of that evening, and I wonder what it was. My neighbors still live there, and I'm too afraid to ask them if they experienced anything, or if there's an explanation for what it was that I saw. This is my journey with the paranormal during my lifetime, and it all started in my childhood home of Jacksonville, Illinois. The following happened when I was in my mid-teens. I was home alone, not really doing anything in particular, when all of a sudden, I heard the front door opening. That was odd. I wasn't expecting anyone to be home at this hour, so I went and checked to see who had arrived. But when I reached the door, it wasn't open. I called out and inspected the house, and there was no one present. This, of course, left me very spooked, but it wasn't the only thing that happened in the house. There would be occasions every once in a while when I was home alone where I'd hear the stairs squeak, as if someone or something was walking up the stairs. Upon checking the house, I would find it vacant of other occupants, and I would resign myself to my room in the hopes of not hearing the sounds again. Skipping forward to when I turned 23, where we reached the horrible part in this story where my beloved mum passes away. This leads me down the path of alcohol and little to no sleep, at most getting 2 to 3 hours a night for about a month. Then one day randomly, I'm in that weird in-between sleep and waking state, and my mum fades in front of my face to say, "Goodbye, Evan. I love you." I say back to her, "Goodbye, Mum. I love you too." Then she starts to stand up and fades away, back to wherever she was in the afterlife. But that interaction finally brought me some peace of mind, and I could start sleeping again. Further down the line, I woke up out of a dead sleep. I was around 26, and I had to pee like a racehorse. So I get up and leave my room, but I'm stopped by an invisible force at my door. I look up and see a shadowy figure standing there, and in my head I ask, "What are you doing here?" And it responds, "Just checking on you." I reply, "Thanks, I'm doing okay." And it vanished. I felt like it was my grandfather who died in '03. This next part happened after I was married to my beautiful wife Megan. I was working for a mail delivery subcontractor that used semi-trucks to deliver the mail from point A to point B, and I was scheduled to work nights that week. So it's the middle of the day, my wife and I are both sound asleep, when I abruptly wake up, and hovering over me I see about 6 foot tall, skinny, completely white beings that looked like they were engaged in some kind of ritual over my body. I recall one of them squatting on my chest to make sure I was laying down, but I turned to see more and I realized I couldn't get back up. It was then that one put its hand on my face to gently put my head down and to fall back asleep, and I did. I didn't tell Megan about this until much later, because had she known, she probably would have never slept in the bed with me again. And for those questioning my sanity, I'm mentally sound. The doctor said I'm not crazy, but then again, I never told him about this. This happened between the ages of 3 and 5, between 1989 and 91. My room was on the complete opposite end of the house from my parents' bedroom. I'd wake up in the middle of the night on a regular basis, scared, and when I'd wake up, I'd remember seeing this woman standing at the end of my bed. I could kind of see through her, but she also put off a glow. It was a warm, loving, welcoming and peaceful glow. She was always wearing a blue tunic and a white headdress. She was always looking down, holding and happily comforting a baby wrapped in a blanket. And after a few seconds of having my eyes open, she'd noticed that I was awake and would act surprised like I wasn't supposed to see her, and then she'd be gone. I never felt threatened by her at all. But I remember the first time I saw her, I didn't even know what to think. As I pulled my sheet over my head before she disappeared, she really did give off an aura that was comforting, welcoming, loving, peaceful and happy. The glow coming off her felt like that, like I knew I was completely safe while sleeping. This happened quite a few times, to the point I'd smile when I saw her after waking up, and she'd look back with a smile that was comforting, yet at the same time also conveying something like, "You aren't actually supposed to see me," while still intentionally let me see her for a few seconds before fading away. I would always be scared right after she'd vanish, because the safe feeling would go too, and I would want to run to my parents' bedroom. I could see my parents' bedroom from the doorway of my room, but you had to walk through the dining room and living room to get to it. There were always these strange shadow figures, dozens of them, walking around the dining room, kitchen and living room. I remember being so scared of them, but I never actually drew their attention while I stood there watching them from my bedroom doorway, and they never really noticed me or walked towards me. It seemed like they were in a hurry, walking with busy intent but never actually going anywhere. I was always scared of them, even more scared that I'd draw their attention, but I wanted the comfort of my parents. I was too scared to run through the shadow people that were walking around, and so I'd scream for my parents from my bedroom doorway. The instant I'd screamed, the shadow people would stop walking, and then all of them would look up towards me with an angry and frustrated aura, but never actually took a step towards me. They'd just disappear. One of the last times I saw the lady at the end of the bed and the shadow people, I wanted to get to my parents' room where they were, but instead of just calling out for them, I closed my eyes and held out my hands to feel my way across the dining room and living room to my parents' bedroom. I actually made it there on my own, even with my eyes closed. I could feel them there before they started to disappear, but I could also feel as they were fading away that they were angry because I wasn't afraid of them anymore. I stopped seeing them shortly after that, which is also around the time I started feeling more comfortable staying in my own bed all night by myself, without needing to have my parents nearby. But it's one of the most real and vivid memories that I can remember from that age, and I'm 38 now. This wasn't even an old house or anything that you'd usually associate as a stereotypical haunted place. It was actually a relatively new, double-wide trailer that my mum and dad had put there a few years before I was born. They brought the trailer brand new, direct from the manufacturer. I feel like what I saw and felt had to be real, because a 3 to 5-year-old wouldn't have been able to imagine that physical presence from her aura that was so welcoming, understanding and comforting, loving and peaceful, that the lady at the end of my bed gave off as she glowed. It was a distinct physical feeling that a 5-year-old wouldn't have been able to just randomly imagine, and a feeling that I somehow remember. I never saw anything like that again in that place, or any other place I've lived in for that matter.
Laughter in the dark. I long for the nights when my mother would don an evening gown, punctuate every sentence of her lecture with the clicks and clacks of her high heels, as she strutted to the door, and I left deep red imprint of her lips on my forehead before she allowed herself to be whisked away by her suitor of the night. Those nights are rare when your single mother works 12-hour shift at a local nursing facility and comes back home to a long evening drinking, loud television, and heated arguments with her children. This night was better than all the others because the universe had aligned the plans of everyone in the household to coincide, leaving me behind for at least 5 hours worth of quiet alone time, something I rarely got. I was in my bedroom, My secret stash of snacks scattered all over my bed, and a one shared laptop we had in the house all to myself. I didn't know what I wanted to watch first, a movie, sing along to karaoke songs on YouTube, have a one-woman dance party. I settled upon watching a scary movie and turned off all the lights to set the mood. I was barely past the 30-minute mark when I heard the distant sound of snickering. For a few seconds I convinced myself that it was just a background noise in the movie I was watching, but my reassurance faltered when I paused the film and still heard it. I was frozen in place. I didn't know what to do. I just waited for something to happen, but nothing did. I slowly shifted my position. The bed frame creaked under my weight as did so. I planted both my feet on the ground and paused for a few minutes. It was most probably one of my siblings. I had come home early and was playing a prank on me. It could have been one of my neighbor's kids, whoever it was. I was a 16-year-old girl who wasn't taking any chances. Finally had a mind to scan the room for anything I could use to defend myself. I shared a room with 6 and 8-year-old girls. The entire place was childproof, and my best bet was a heavy sports trophy, but I figured that it was better than nothing. The snickering got louder and nearer. It was turning into chuckles. I didn't know whether I wanted to wait here until I was found or to do finding myself. I took another long, hard look at the trophy in my hands and decided to wait. With each minute passed, the laughter increased in volumes and enthusiasm. It sounded like a child who knew his parents were heading towards his hiding spot during a game of hide and seek, laughing with the voice of an adult. Then I heard the sounds of chairs being dragged across the hardwood floor. It didn't sound like it was much with purpose other than to clear them out of the way. A slippery, slobby, wet noise followed suit. Sounded familiar. It wasn't one I had particularly heard before. Whoever was in my kitchen was slamming, ripping apart and mushing whatever it has in his hand. I heard squishes and squelches. Could only assume that it was some sick psychopath with a fetish for breaking into houses and mauling large animals. Whatever it was laughing all throughout. I was terrified. There was a stranger in my kitchen, laughing maniacally as he seemingly prepared himself for a snack on the counter. There was an intruder in the downstairs, this place where I had left my cell phone. I turned around to look at my laptop, wondering if the police would respond to emails. I decided to give it a try and tiptoed back to my bed. My trembling fingers struggled to type slowly and quietly, but eventually I managed to send an email and post for help on social media. An excruciating 7 minutes passed by until I heard someone pull up on the driveway. It didn't sound like the police. I heard the sound of a heavy footsteps running up the front door, frantically jamming a key into the hole and swinging the door open. The laughter stopped for a brief second before it turned into a roaring guffaw. A shriek and an ear-piercing scream penetrated the silence in the neighborhood, and whoever produced it turned around and ran towards the street, taking their screams with them. The manic laughter followed suit, and I finally dared to run to the bedroom window. I saw my sister running down the street while screaming. Running in the opposite direction was a naked man covered in massive amount of blood that I had only seen before on television. He was still roaring with laughter as he disappeared out of sight. I watched out of the window as a post gathered just outside my house. My sister hadn't stopped screaming. I realized that she wasn't just trying to attract attention, but she was actually hysterical, and I didn't want to go downstairs and greet whatever had brought my sister to such state. The crowd grew larger as the flashing red and blue lights arrived and a footstep stormed into my house. I heard curses and wretches downstairs before someone finally called out. All I could manage to produce at first was a squeak. A female officer appeared in my doorway and asked me if I was alright. She told me to follow her with my eyes closed. Great advice for a rebellious teenager. I noticed her grasp become tighter as we reached the bottom of the stair, and I couldn't help myself treating myself to peek. There, through squinted eyes, I saw the dismembered body parts of my mother, neatly arranged beside her decapitated head on the kitchen counter. I passed out. 47 minutes. That was long. I had spent listening to my mother being torn into, ripped apart, mutilated, and eaten. The person responsible for that straight to his nursing facility, straight to his bedroom, and straight into bed. He laughed as they restrained him to his bed. He laughed as he'd taken away in cuffs. He laughed as he was locked up in a cell. He laughed as he made eye contact with me in the courtroom as his sentence was being announced. I won't be surprised if he was still laughing when they strap him to the chair. He will never laugh again, nor will my mother. The call came from inside the house. As a child, I remember never feeling alone when I was. There was always something watching me. Things move in my room on their own. I had a tiny porcelain angel given to me by a dead family member that had a specific spot, and it'd be somewhere else when I came back from my room. Something would knock on my doors and walls. I'd get scratched and they'd be bleeding for hours even though they were tiny surface scratches. Stuff fell over or straight across the room and doors would slam. When I was 6th grader, I had a friend spend the night when my family was out with my friends and we were alone. My sister used to play scary pranks on me. Her friend would wear masks and knock on my windows and stare at me through the big window in my house. My mom didn't believe in curtains, so anyone could just stare into my house. Damn you, Mom, for my eternal paranoia. Anyway, when we were dropped off at my house, the first thing that I did was lock every single door. I didn't fuck around as a child, and I knew at this point that sounds in my home weren't normal, so I always paranoid and locking everything all the time. So everything is locked and light is on. But remember, I have 0 curtains or blinds on any windows, and it's also December too. Feet of snow on the ground, we head downstairs and put a movie on. Just some quick info, my house wasn't built well. You can hear what everyone's doing from every single room. I also had a very prissy and sensitive dog at the time, who barked when you stood up and constantly growled at any sound she heard. I couldn't walk into the room without her barking. Annoying, yes, but I also think about the shits she saw and heard in that house the hours we were gone. She's down there, chilling with me and my friend. This like 2008, we still had a landline phone. I had a cell phone as everyone did at that point, and our home phone was never used except for telemarketers. We got rid of it shortly after this occurred. There was one in the kitchen, my mom's room, and the basement. Halfway through the movie, we hear footsteps upstairs. Cool, my parents or sister was home, and I thought maybe I had the TV up too loud and missed the garage opening, which was definitely closed when we got home. There's no key to any doors, so unless the front door was unlocked, which it wasn't, the garage was the only way in. I turned the TV down and called up to them. They'd definitely be able to hear me. Nobody answered, so I called my sister's name and nothing. My dog is quite annoyed and growing loudly at this point. There is a door that goes outside of my basement, and she's staring at it like she wants to go potty, but I think she was trying to get out of hell of there. I decided to call my parents and sister, and they weren't home. I didn't mention anything to them and quickly hang up. Stupid, right? They never believed the sounds and things that happened to me in the house growing up, so I decided not to bother them with something else. At this point, it's been 5 minutes, and they're still walking around, except they are now stomping in what sounds like a circle. Like stomping in a circle in the same spot, but it's right above us in the living room. My selfish ass decides to sacrifice my dog and I send her upstairs. This is when I knew something was wrong. She gets up the stairs and sits and begins to whimper when she should be barking her little ass off. And this is hitting me. My cell phone rings and my home phone calling me from the inside the house. I answer and they hang up right away. I tell my friend to get her shit together because she's crying and my phone rings again. This time, there's distinct breathing and a wheezing sound like the dead wheeze when someone's about to die. I hung up so fast. That's when I did the pounding step stop. I whisper to my friend to slowly walk to the door that leads outside, and she makes it over to me as I get the door open. I shit you not, this still absolutely freaks me out, as we're about to step our bare ass feet outside. The steps bound to the stairs, and they are booking it down, my stairs. They should have taken a tumble with how fast they were going down the steps. I never jumped into some snow as fast as I did, and I remember a ton of it landing inside the basement, so I was forced to leave the door open. We are sprinting around my house to the street. Partway up to the street, something stops me, and I stop and turn around. All of the cold air seemed to melt away and pause with me. It was like all of my senses, but my sight just vanished and I froze. There's a figure standing in the kitchen waving at us. Not like the waving when you see someone, and you're like, hey girl, and waving like an idiot. This was like its elbow was still and its arm was waving side to side, like creepy ass waving. I was only 50 feet away and I should have been able to make out some details or features about this person, but it was all just black silhouette, as if they were completely painted black from head to toe. It's just fucking waving at me and I can't take my eyes away. It was unlike any trance I've ever been, and when I come to, my friend is screaming in my face and is trying to pull me away. I call my parents about a mile away from my home, and I literally can't feel my feet anymore, and they race home. They walk all around the house trying to get in before going in, and not only is everything locked, the basement door, I left it wide open, was closed and locked, and all the snow that had come in when we raced out was gone. Not even a spot of carpet, but our footprints were there. I was so fucking odd, and nobody was in the house. No other footprints around the home but ours. This is 100% real. My friend told me, and everyone and nobody ever wanted to stay at my house, which caused me to have some sad birthday parties. But I completely understand. Still don't know what happened. I'm still paranoid about being alone. But I'm in an apartment now that's very secure. I just wish I knew what happened that day, and if what I saw was the first actual apparition, or if you'll get tricky with your break-ins. Both ways are equally terrifying to me.
Soon. After a long shift of stocking shelves, I trudged home. The streets were empty, just as they always were this time of night. But tonight, something felt different. The usual hum of distant traffic seemed muted, like the city itself was holding its breath. As I walked, the flickering streetlight outside my building cast eerie shadows on the cracked sidewalk, stretching unnaturally long, almost reaching out for me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. When I turned around, the street was just empty as before. I brushed it off. Long shifts and dark neighborhoods played tricks on the mind. I fumbled with the keys and unlocked the door to my apartment building. The elevator as usual was out of service, so I took the stairs two at a time, anxious to get inside and forget the creeping sense of unease that followed me home. The apartment I shared with Mark wasn't in the best of neighborhoods, but at least it wasn't my parents' basement. Outlet out to breathe, I hadn't realized I'd been holding as I stepped into the small space we called home. The familiar scent of old furniture and stale pizza greeted me. It was comforting in a weird way. I tossed my jacket on a coat rack and headed into the kitchen, my stomach growling. I opened the fridge, disappointed but unsurprised by the lack of decent food. Just as I reached for a frozen burrito, something caught my eye, something subtle but unsettling. My bedroom door, which I distinctly remember closing that morning, was slightly ajar. I stared at it for a moment, my hand hovering in the mid-air, forgotten. It wasn't normal for me to leave the door open. In fact, I never let it open.